Hi, thanks for joining me. I am Sandra Brown with the Institute for Relational Harm Reduction and Public Pathology Education. I'm also the current president for the Association for Narcissistic Personality Disorder and Psychopathy Survivor Treatment. That's a big agency title. So I've been doing a series of these little talks, and below this video I will list links to the first video, which is called, hold on, Introduction, What I Meant. And so I direct you there to understand why and what I'm doing in these videos. So as a brief recap, How to Spot a Dangerous Man was a book I wrote in 2005 that introduced the concept of dangerousness in cluster B based relationships where one of the partners had a cluster B disorder, which then introduced this book in 2008, Women Who Love Psychopaths, Inside the Relationships of Inevitable Harm, which then began really diving into the relationship dynamics, the traits in survivors that are targeted by these types, followed in 2009 by this edition. These are just growing editions, first edition, second edition, which went into more on our study on the issue of cognitive dissonance, the trauma that is often called aftermath. And then the latest version of the same book that came out in 2018, which is a thesis, if you will, on the relationship dynamics, more on the traits of survivors that are targeted, and lots of information on the trauma. So anyway, as the books that sort of launched what has become known as the narcissistic abuse field, I'm seeing a lot of stuff out there that I feel is misrepresenting what we do know after years and years and lots of research. And so I would hate to see a lot of the work that I put in and other people that began over the last decade also in this field be misconstrued. And I think we're getting off track. And so this series has been, at least for me, an effort at theory correction and sort of redirecting the understanding to what we do know. There's been so much, at least on my part, my 30-year career working with these survivors and doing a lot of the research that is behind the theory about cluster B relationships, or what they call narcissistic abuse, or psychopathic abuse, or pathological love relationship abuse. And so we do know a lot scientifically from all the data that I've been collecting over the years, the research that we've done. So I want to encourage people with the correct information we do know. I hear a whole lot out there by survivors that are not therapists, that didn't do the research, that of stuff that is not part of our theory. It's not part of what I have taught or what I found in writing about these books. So today I want to jump in on the issue of about no contact. And so the vast majority of assistance to survivors of these types of relationships has become social media type help, which is mostly survivors sharing what they learned. So somewhere along the line, probably back around 2005, when our website came up, someone read our book. Someone read our website, our article library of over 400 articles I've written about these relationships. And a survivor wrote their own assumptions and conceptions of their experience. They've taken clips and a little bit of theory from our books, website, articles, just enough to name a concept, but without the full application of that concept. And so it's like, playing telephone. A survivor read our stuff, wrote a book, another survivor read that survivor book, wrote their book, did their website, and it, all began as a grassroots movement, coming up out of a lot of information that's been passed along by survivors, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's reflected correctly. So I want to talk about this issue of no contact because it's the number one thing you read everywhere, on every blog, every coach, every website, every social media, every ebook. And we did talk about no contact in all, of these books. So, all of them started with that idea that, of course, it's really hard to recover when you are being exposed to the agent of your trauma. And so it's just common sense. It's what we knew back, in domestic violence about working with the victims to get them moved out of that environment. And so no contact is, yes, very important, and it's a first step. But the way it's being portrayed out there is as if that step one of a very long recovery journey is some kind of magical panacea, that's the primary thing that happens in recovery. And it has to happen because you can't cool down the traumatized brain enough to think clearly. But it can't and should not be seen as more than what it is. And the presentation of it out there is more than what it is. So some of the stuff I see is people begin to use this idea of no contact as a measurement. So I will read a survivor that says, I've been NC, or I've been no contact for 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. And another survivor, will respond, and I've been no contact this length of time. And survivors are beginning to associate, the amount of time of not having contact or being out of the relationship as some overall measurement of recovery. And we don't see it that way. We measure recovery by symptom reactivity, by how much trauma symptoms that you are still having. We don't measure it by how much time you have had no contact. Time out should be seen as time or an opportunity to engage in recovery. In and of itself, no contact measures nothing other than no contact. It is not reflective of progress in recovery. And so many survivors are banking on that. You can hear it in what they're saying, that they have been no contact, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. And they're waiting for the magic of that no contact to help reduce their trauma symptoms. And it's not going to do that. It gives the opportunity for a traumatized system, like their fight or flight system, to reduce a little bit. But in and of itself, no contact is not going to do some magic thing to the rest of your trauma symptoms. So I kind of liken it to like addictions. So an addict can go, to a 12-step meeting, and they, for their length of time of no contact, having no contact with the agent of their destruction, which is substance or alcohol, they get a chip. And it's a big deal. It's like a celebration of no contact with the agent of their destruction. However, it's not an indicator that that person has done completed the step 2 or 3 or the rest of the steps. There are plenty of people who go and sit in those meetings who have gotten a pocket full of chips that haven't really done day 1 work on themselves. They are still as symptomatic as an addict as they were the day they got their first chip. And that's because time gave them an opportunity to engage in recovery. But whether or not they did that is a whole other thing. And so that pocket full of chips of no contact with the agent of their destruction doesn't necessarily mean anything. That's why sometimes they call them like dry drunks. And that means they've got that pocket full of chips, but they are still really symptomatic as the day that they went to a meeting. They haven't used that 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days of no contact with the agent of their destruction to engage more in symptom reduction in a real recovery. And so I'm concerned when I hear these coaches and, you know, and some of the articles that they're writing, that this idea of no contact some way implies that that is a deeper level of engagement in recovery than I think it really is. And again, of course, it absolutely has to happen. But what happens after that is just as important. And if I'm reading that someone is, 3 months or, however long out of that relationship and they're still not really working a recovery program, I'm concerned, because that no contact has already worked its magic. The survivor has gotten some physical and emotional relief from that distance, because physical distance helps to create emotional distance, but they have to move beyond no contact into engagement with all the other work that comes after this no contact. So yes, we are thankful, we are grateful anytime that a survivor, gets a little no contact time under their belt. But beyond that, that is not the panacea of recovery. There's lots of things that have to happen. And that's because in our research over 30 years, that shockingly, 90% of survivors coming out of these relationships with cluster Bs and or psychopaths, 90% of them had trauma symptoms. Only 15% of those survivors had their trauma dissipate or improve on their own without having to really engage in a full recovery approach. So that leaves 75% of survivors in need of more help. And considering that 75% is represented in trauma symptoms that roll over into a full-blown trauma disorder, we're talking about the necessity of trauma treatment. So beyond this issue of no contact, and once a survivor has been able to maintain that and get a little bit of the benefit that no contact brings, it should be just preparing them to enter into a recovery program for this. And so I'm not happy to see this being represented as more than it is. And so many of these coaching programs that I'm looking at, there's all this emphasis, you know, put on this no contact and helping you get there and explaining what it is. And okay, well, that's, you know, 5 minutes of explaining and maybe a week or a month of support to get a survivor, you know, out of that environment. And then what? And then comes the rest of the work. And so I just wanted to, you know, clarify that about what, you know, we had been writing about over the last 15 years, and how that concept has really been distorted. And I wanted to clarify that, you know, it's the first necessary step, and then real recovery, you know, takes off from there. So thank you for joining me. Like I said, I'm going to be doing a series and, you know, addressing some of the stuff that I am seeing in abundance out there that is not what I said, not what I meant, and not what I wrote. So I hope you'll be checking back with this series and share it in your survivor recovery groups and social media, so that we can use the real science. There is real science behind this. That's what we've been collecting for all these years. There's real stuff, real good stuff, real scientific stuff, real science behind these relationships and behind the trauma and the treatment and recovery. If you would like to drop by our website, it is saferelationshipsmagazine.com. You'll see your recovery starts here. If you click on that, there is a drop down, and the Living Recovery Program is our trauma reduction program that we created from our 30 years of experience with survivors, and what we have written and created as a model of care treatment for survivors. And it's very affordable. So go by, take a look at that, and hopefully I'll be back and we'll talk some more about some theory correction. So thanks for joining me. This has been Sandra Brown with the Institute for Relational Harm Reduction. Thanks.